Welcome back to my Crochet 101 series. Today I'm going to be going over the top 10 beginner crochet projects, and I'll also be giving you guidance on how to make them. My objective today will be to guide you through examples of practical and easy projects that I feel are great for beginners. For a little bit of an overview, I'm going to be summarizing common techniques used in beginner crochet projects first. Then I'll actually get into the 10 crochet projects that I personally recommend when you're starting crochet. And throughout each project that I list, I will also be guiding you in my tips on how I'd recommend you actually going about making them. Without further ado, let's get started. For the concepts, I went over previously beginner stitches, and if you want to check out that video, then feel free to. But I'm talking things like single crochet, double, half double, and other concepts like chaining or slip stitches. Then we have the more advanced beginner things. They're not too complicated, and with a quick Google search or search on YouTube, I'm sure you're able to find an article and or video that can guide you in them. But things like increasing and decreasing stitches, joining, and when I say joining, I mean like if you have to, for instance, put together two granny squares, it's okay if you do not know what those are yet, but things like that, as well as color switching, are a couple more advanced beginner sort of concepts. For color switching, if I do list anything that does involve switching colors and you're not comfortable with that, you can also just do the project using all one color. But switching of colors or using multiple colors is something that's fun because it adds a little bit of character to your piece and just makes it a little bit more interesting. But let's continue on. So our first project is going to be dishcloths, which I classify to be very easy. Reason being because it's legitimately just a big rectangle. So how I would go about working this is to take any stitch. So let's say you have single crochet or double crochet, any stitch really that you choose. You can work it across in a straight line, and you can work that for however many rows that you want for whatever size you want. And for a lot of times, because it'll be kind of boring if you just do that entirely. A lot of people have made up like special stitches, and typically speaking, for any pattern that you come across for a dishcloth, if they say, oh, it's worked in this stitch, they'll also list what the special stitch is and how you would complete it. But these special stitches pretty much just add like an interesting texture to just make it a little more interesting. Yarn wise, I'd recommend using a cotton yarn, and the reason is because anytime you're making something that is going to be touching your skin or on your skin, for the purposes of one, it being washable, but two, so that it doesn't cause agitation or anything, I would just recommend cotton. Next up, we have a scarf. Now, the dishcloth was very easy, but I say that the scarf is easy, reason being because it's bigger. It is, however, have some of the same concepts. So you would essentially take whatever stitch that you want and work it in a straight line across however many rows you would like. And for a lot of things like scarves and hats, you'll see this sort of ribbing effect. The way to get that would be crocheting in the back loop of your stitch. And so with a stitch, you usually have a front loop and a back loop, and you crochet in the back loop. And when you keep doing that across each row, then you'll start to notice that that's what gives it its ribbing. As far as what yarn to use, I'd recommend anything that's stretchy or soft, like an acrylic or wool yarn. Next up, we have coasters. So these can range from very easy to easy, and I'll tell you why. So similarly to a dishcloth, you're working stitches across several rows. And you can have different coasters, by the way. You can have these circular coasters, or you can also have like square coasters, but you'll oftentimes usually see circular ones. So you would essentially work what is known as the magic ring, which I've also went over in my beginner crochet techniques video. But essentially, you would be working stitches in the round, and you choose whatever kind of stitch. So single crochet, double crochet, if you're doing a special stitch in the round, and that would be to grow the size, and you'll do increases each one, which most of the time for an increase, it's as simple as literally just placing two or more stitches in per row or per stitch in order to increase the number of stitches that you have. There are charts that you can find where, like, let's say you're trying to do something from scratch. There's charts that you can find to actually figure out, like, okay, I have this many stitches that I started with on my first row. Where am I supposed to increase and how am I supposed to increase? As far as the yarn type, I'd recommend cotton or acrylic. As I mentioned before, this can be either a very easy or an easy one. The reason being because if you take a look at, for instance, this spring bloom coaster, it looks fairly easy. You're increasing and you're probably doing something like uh, doing like chains and skipping them to get these holes in there. And that's going to be on the more simplistic side. But you can also get some very visually interesting coasters such as these. I recommend, of course, starting with like the spring bloom coasters just to get comfortability. But then once you're more proficient at things like color switching and increases and things like that, then you can have your try at more complex ones like this. Next up, we have a glasses holder case, which I recommend as as easy. Concept wise, you would want to work your desired amount of stitches in a straight line for the given amount of rows to create sort of like a rectangular shaped piece. And then you would need to fold over to create that pocket. And then I say whip stitch to close the holder because it's one of the easier join methods, but there are other methods that you would could choose. But you would close up the sides to create that pocket, leaving that top part open right there. And then you can attach a button to this piece right here so that you can shut it closed. By the way, I know that I said to work it in rows. For this piece to create right there, that's essentially just the result of chaining a given amount of chains. So let's just say if you chained 4, skipping 4 stitches, and then continuing on like that. And then you'll get sort of that little piece where you can attach to a button. And for this, I would also recommend cotton yarn, just so you don't want anything that's scratching too much on your glasses. Next up, we have granny squares, which, similarly to what I said about coasters, they can be very easy or easy. There is the traditional granny square pattern that you'll probably see a lot, but they also have really, really interesting ones with different symbols. You can have like pumpkins or skeletons. So far, I'm only thinking of Halloween ones because October is here coming, but just different visual ones. And to do these granny squares, it usually starts with creating a magic ring, crocheting in the round to get that centerpiece. And I'm talking specifically about the one that's on the screen. For different ones, they'll have different concepts. But then you would do clusters to actually get it from being this circular shape that you start with to being an actual square. And this will involve, let's say, if you're doing this granny square, color changing, which, like I said, I would recommend because talking about it and describing it is not, I don't think, going to be very effective. So I recommend actually looking it up, how to color change. But I'm telling you, it is very, very easy. As far as joining squares, I talked about how there's many different join methods. There's some that are effective for if you want like a really nice, seamless, invisible join, or if you don't care. But granny squares are really nice because you can actually use them to create other things. I'm talking things like cardigans, blankets. I've seen, obviously you can use them as coasters if you want to do that. I've seen a bunch of different things, tissue box holders. So that's why I say down here that the yarn type that I recommend would really just depend on a specific project. Most of the time I see like acrylic because again, it has that characteristic stretchiness that you kind of want out of a project. I don't necessarily think I've seen one for like cotton, but never say never. Next up, we have, and this is just another example of a granny square. This one's a little bit more elaborate than the last. Next up, we have hats, which I classify now as easy, and we're getting into the upper beginner territory. So overall, there are different ways to make a hat. Generally speaking, it would involve crocheting a rectangular piece, using that crocheting in the back loop only to create that rib effect we talked about, and then using a tapestry needle to actually close the hat up. Now, I have also seen other ones where you kind of will do shorter stitches on the edge that's going to close up the hat, and that essentially helps with tapering it in more naturally. But this is a very good craft, I feel like, if you're trying to work on one, the ribbing effect that we talked about, but also work on your proficiency with the tapestry needle, which is usually what you use to weave in ends. Yarn wise, I'd recommend something similar to your scarf, so something acrylic or wool that's gonna have stretch but also be soft. We now have cup koozies, which are easy. Similar to things we've talked about before, you want to work your stitches in a straight line for several rows, and then I'm talking about specifically this mug koozie. You would attach at the ends. So at the beginning of your project, you would have this going. So you'd have first attaching it in the round. Then you're going to work your stitches all around like this, skipping that last one. And essentially what you're doing with skipping those for several rows is creating that placement for the handle to go through. Once you're at the last row, you're going to then attach it back, and that's what's going to close it up. So then you also have things like jar koozies. And for this one, you just want to start similar to a coaster where you have a round base where you're increasing to the base of the actual jar. And then to work the body, you just don't do any more increases. You just continue crocheting all the way up until you hit the height that you would like to meet. And I talked about color switching. This is an example of a project where you can color switch if you want to make this cool stripe look, but you could also just do one singular color. And for both the mug koozie and the jar koozie, I would recommend cotton just for the sake of heat. For the most part, you can get away with using like acrylic yarn. It's not going to burn unless you have something that's like ridiculously hot, but I would still just recommend cotton. Now we have a bottle holder, which is an upper beginner level. You would essentially crochet in the round for the base, and then the body can be either a stitch if you're choosing, so all single crochet, all half double, all double, like that, or you might have a special pattern that's for the body where there's no increasing that's going on, you're just going up the entire length of it. And then you would add on the straps, which most of the time it just is a certain stitch worked for the length of the chain of the strap, and then you do a couple rows of that to create a thickness, and then you would use whatever join method that you prefer to attach it onto the actual holder. For this one, again, recommend cotton or acrylic. And you see that there's different sort of styles. Then we have a book sleeve, another upper beginner project. For this one, you would crochet in both sides of the foundation chain. So what I mean by that is that, typically speaking, if you'll be told to chain however many, let's say you have to chain 36, and this chain amount would be essentially the length of the longest side of your book. And usually you go into each chain and you do your stitch of choice. However, if you, instead of chaining and turning, if you then essentially pretend like you're hitting like a U-turn almost, like you're going back from the end to the beginning of the foundation chain, then that'll be what you're essentially trying to do. And that's a good way it's a common thing that you'll do, for instance, for things like tote bags, but in this case, it will also apply. And then from there, you'll just keep going, essentially in the round. You're kind of in the round at that point, but you'll keep going in rows until you build up however wide your book is. And so for this one, any yarn of your choice will do. Of course, acrylic, it's cheap, it has a nice stretch, comes in a variety of colors, so that's what I would use. And here's another one. For this one, same concept, pretty much. It's a slightly different stitch that's worked in the last one, but you have these flowers, which, if I remember correctly, they are made separately, and then they're hot glued on, and then of course you can add the button. Finally, we have produce bags. This is truly upper beginner level. Now, we do still have that same concept of crocheting in both sides of the foundation chain, but now the reason I say it's definitely upper beginner is that it just, size-wise, it's bigger. But you're using the mesh stitch, which is typically just taking your yarn, and you're doing a chain of however many, or you're doing a stitch, chaining however many, usually 1 or 2, skipping that many stitches, and then doing your stitch again, and you're just repeating that across to create this mesh texture. And then to make the actual tie, you chain however many lengthwise that you want and then weave it into the bag. And because it's a mesh pattern, they're already kind of pre-built in holes, so it makes it easy to weave it in there. For the color changing aspect, again, for this one, it looks like as easy as, because you're not alternating per se, you're just doing one color and then changing to the other one. You could fasten off that first color and then attach into one of the actual mesh holes, attach the new color, and then continue the pattern on. For the yarn type, I would recommend cotton. So I have went over basic beginner crochet techniques and concepts. I went through 10 easy beginner patterns, and I've also given you guidance on how to actually create the patterns. I hope this was helpful. I know that when you're actually thinking about crochet, you probably have something in mind. You probably saw someone else doing it, and that's what, or saw it and thought it was really cool, and that's what got you into it. But when it comes to practice, the best way to get better is just crocheting different things. And also you'll find that it helps you figure out your niche or what you like and enjoy to do. And so I thought I would compile a list of these different crochet projects. And while I did give you guidance and ideas about general things, I will include links to the pictured projects or items in case you want to go specifically to those. All of them are free, but let's say this is giving you inspiration and ideas. You can research any of what I've talked about, and you'll probably find more patterns, whether they be paid or free. Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you have a great day, and bye.